Hey guys, Grand J here, and welcome to the second part of our Double Trinity deck workshop video. So in the first part of our video, we talked about the deck itself. It had the deck list, explained to you the general idea of the deck, and just to get you going. But today's video is part 2, where we dig deeper into the deck, talk about what it's all about, and really sort of pick out the strategy of how to get the most out of your deck. So today's video is all about the overall strategy, your opening hands mulligans, your mid-game to early game strategies, specific combos, matchups, meta changes, and any sort of final tips that I can sort of impart to you. So if you guys are looking for the part 1 video, or you guys haven't seen the part 1 video, there's going to be a link in the description. Otherwise, thanks a lot. We'll get started. So the overall strategy of the deck is to be an aggro deck. So it is fundamentally an aggro deck, but unlike other aggro decks, it's got a lot of resources. So the goal is to be an aggressor and to force responses from your opponent. Typically in other aggro decks, you want to create aggression that your opponent can't respond with. This deck is all about being aggressive, allowing your opponent to respond to you, but always having more resources, just send more dudes back. So you're able to play a lot of mid-sized forwards more cheaply than your opponent can respond to them. Your opponent's going to play responses. Eventually, your opponent's just going to run out of answers, and you're going to be able to leak through. It's pretty much that's the strategy. In regards to opening hands and mulligans, your opening hand is to have a Yuna or Artemission plus a Riku. You want to get your Yuna and Riku combo out as soon as possible. In a lot of cases, yeah, you definitely want to have the 2 girls available, and then that means you can put them down turn 1, and that sets you up for a very good turn 2, turn 3, and onwards. So yeah, so keep any hand with Yuna Artemission plus Riku. Also pretty much keep any hand with Artemission because he's just an excellent turn 1 play. You put him down on your first turn, and you can mulligan either 4 or 5 cards to the bottom of your deck, and you can usually build your Yuna and Riku combo very quickly from there. Additionally, keep any hand with Yuna plus Archer slash Riku slash Maria. And the reason why we do this is so we can get 2 backups in on your first turn, 1 water and 1 wind. And that way we color fix, so we don't have to discard specific colors from there on out in the game. And it means that we have a very good turn 2 backup play. Additionally, any hand where we have Pain R plus Riku is also acceptable. Pain R plus Yuna isn't, however, acceptable. And the reason for this is because Pain R is a win forward and Riku is a win backup. So in our first turn, we'll be able to play Riku using like a win discard. On the following turn, we're then able to tap Riku, discard any card from our hand to play Pain R, and then that allows us to search for Yuna. We can play that out. If you go the other way of Pain R plus Yuna, you end up deciding a lot of win cards. On your second turn, when you tap Yuna, you have to discard a win card to put Pain R in play to get a Riku. Then you have to discard another win card to get Riku in play. And that's a lot of win cards that you have to sacrifice in order to get Riku into play. So it's definitely way better with Pain R plus Riku as opposed to Pain R and Yuna. Mulligan any hands where you have 2 Zidane S or 2 Pain S, simply because these are cards we want to be drawing sort of around the mid-game or after we get set up. If we have them early, they're just going to be dead cards in our hand. And pretty much mulligan any other hands that doesn't really fit the structure of what we've got going on at the moment. In terms of opening plays, the deck prefers to go second because it does give us an extra draw, which is really important. We want to be able to confirm and get our Yuna and Riku in as soon as possible. Also, Artemission gets more value if you go second. If you play Artemission, if you go first, you'll have 6 cards in hand. You discard 1 to put Artemission, you're able to put 4 cards at the bottom of your deck. But if you're going second, you'll have 7 cards, which means you get an extra card out of your Artemission mulligan, which effectively means that you see 1 extra card when you draw the extra card, but also when you Artemission, you get 1 more extra card worth of mulligan. So it's definitely much better to go second. Additionally, this deck likes to put 2 backups down on its first turn, and having an extra card really sort of helps us doing that. Ideally, ideally you want to have 2 backups down, ideally a wind and a water backup, and this just basically color fixes us. It means that on the second turn, we don't have to discard any specific color in order to get any cards into play. Also, this allows us to put a free turn 2 backup in as well, and that's really what we want to be. We want to have, at the end of our second turn, free backups in, because a lot of our cards all rely on us having free backups. In regards to our second turn, it's all about getting that third backup into play. So basically, if you've got your Riku or your Yuna or your Artemission, ideally, we had 2 backups in play. We tapped 2 of them and put a third backup in play. The fact that Maria is an even costed backup is also handy. So if you can't get anything else into play, definitely put the Maria down, tap 2 backups, discard a card, and you can put the Maria in, and then we have free backups. And there's a whole big reason to why getting free backups as soon as possible is really important for this deck, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. If you don't have the ability to put that third backup, whether it's because you didn't draw into 1, or you didn't mulligan into 1, or just your hand isn't that great, then play a cycle forward. So any forward that sort of nets you cards. So Zidane S or Steiner or Pain are. These are all cards that you can play early on as just like a bit of a forward, bit of presence, and it's supposed to get you more cards into your hand. And all of this is just to help us get to that third backup as soon as possible. So yeah, you really want to have Yuna and Riku out by the end of your second turn. This might sound crazy, or it seems like you're really trying to rely on your luck too much, but this deck has a lot of ability to do that. Between Artemission and Pain, this deck has a lot of ability to just build its backups very, very quickly. Yeah, if you can't get Riku or Yuna out, obviously put Pain R in and try to complete your Final Fantasy X combo as soon as possible. So, turn 3 is when we start applying pressure. Don't feel too bad that you take like 1 or 2, potentially at worst 3 damage up to this stage, simply because we can respond very, very quickly. Turn 3 is when you can play all your forwards very, very efficiently. Cards such as Steiner can be played with 1 discard. Pain effectively becomes free if you happen to have Riku, Yuna, and another backup in play. We can get Zidane in. If you have like no FF9 cards to play with it, you can get a Zidane in. Garnet's not a bad forward to play as well. So these are all forwards that we can play very, very cheaply and efficiently at free CP. And the thing is, we're not limited to playing just one of them. There have been plenty of times when my opponent has had an aggressive start. That's fine. You take 1 or 2 damage early on, and then after you get to that free backups, turn 3, you go Pain, reactivate your backups, draw a card, play Steiner, discarding cards such as Zidane, discard a card, put Zidane in, draw a card. You've basically put 3 forwards down at 7,000 power at virtually no discards. So it's an extremely aggressive deck. It can build up its board very, very quickly and burn very little resources. If you compare that to, say, like an aggressive deck that can put like 2 or 3 forwards down, it's discarding like 3 or 4 cards in order to get free 7Ks onto the field, but we can do it for effectively no discards. You think about it, Pain draws you a card. Steiner, although you discard a card, you do get one forward out of it, and Zidane basically comes in for free if you're discarding to draw a card as well. So you can get these forwards out very, very quickly and without really discarding any sort of significant amount of cards from your hands. So yeah, so the idea of the deck is that you really want to focus on having 1 more forward than your opponent. So the reason is that you want to be able to leak through damage to your opponent. Obviously, that's how you win the game. But it means against aggressive decks, you have 1 more forward than your opponent. So it means that your opponent has to work a little bit harder in order to deal damage to you. So you're walling off your opponent. And against more control decks, it means that you have more forwards than your opponent, so your opponent has to deal with more blockers. But additionally, if you have only 1 more forward than your opponent, it means that it limits the impact of board wipes. A lot of control decks have board wipes, such as Zalira, such as Shantoto. These sort of cards are going to destroy 2 or 3 of your forwards at a time. And if you only limit yourself to having, say, 1 more forward than your opponent, in most of the cases, the impact isn't too severe, and you can respond to your opponent's aggression. So yeah, so don't worry about taking damage against aggro decks early on, because you'll simply be able to match your aggression as soon as turn 3 comes around. So even at worst, you take 2 or 3 damage, you'll be fine. Not to mention, this deck has a lot of EX bursts. In between Pain, Steiner, every one of our summons is an EX burst, whether it's Trukuhulan, whether it's Leviathan, whether it's Sylph. These are all cards that are going to be giving you an advantage from taking that early game damage. And because your opponent's discarding cards to put these forwards into play, they're sacrificing a lot of resources, and if you bounce one of them back with Leviathan, that's only going to help you more. So, after you have your forwards out, attack aggressively. I cannot emphasize this enough. This deck has a lot of combat tricks. In between Trukuhulan and Sylph, you can get over larger forwards. You have ways to pump your forwards from 7k over. In addition, you also have Garnet and Maria to help get your forwards like that 1k higher. So if you're just having a Maria, all your 7ks become 8ks, which is a very, very relevant mark. And the fact that your free CP forwards are very, very cheap, it means they're able to trade against your opponent's 4 CP forwards. And that's extremely strong. If your opponent is discarding cards to put in, say, a Vincent or an Emperor that's sitting around 8,000 power, if you trade a Light Zidane at 8,000 power, you are absolutely fine. You've effectively played a Zidane for free, and you've traded into your opponent's Emperor. That's absolutely fine. You can play another Zidane down, you can cycle more, but your opponent's in the tough situation where they have to be discarding cards to get forwards that aren't necessarily going to be netting the resources again. So take the trades if you need to, but your forwards are just going to be able to match against forwards that are much costlier than them. In addition to this, you've also got like other little things such as Sylph and Barbarisha to help you trade against larger not Sylph. You have Barbarisha and Valor to help you trade against larger forwards. So Valor deals 3,000 damage to all your opponent's forwards. Barbarisha makes them 1,000 power. So there'll be times where you attack with, say, a Zidane or a Payne, and your opponent blocks with one of their bigger forwards, whether it's like, say, a Yang, whether it's, say, like an Eperzand, or whether it's like a Deleter or something. So something that's bigger and you can't get over it and your opponent's going to block with it, cool, that's fine. You lose the Payne, and then you can finish it off with a Valor 4, or finish it off with a Barbarisha. These are things that can help you get over larger blockers from your opponent. Yep. So the mid game, around the mid game, you should have ball control. Your opponent is in general going to be responding to your aggression. They'll either be trying to block your forwards or they'll be trying to remove them. That's absolutely fine because this deck is very good at putting forwards out. In general, once you get to the mid game, you want to avoid overextending. So after you do have ball control, you'll have more forwards than your opponents, or you'll have more pressure than your opponents. Your opponents will be putting down forwards to replace the forwards that they're trading against, or they're going to be holding resources back to remove your forwards. In this situation, you're going to have forwards out. Do not overextend by going over 3 forwards. In general, that's going to be the case for you. There are some exceptions, definitely against like more Stoli, Wally, or even like Mill sort of decks, where you do like sort of put more forwards out against your opponent to really sort of aggress them as fast as you can. But in general, don't try to overextend. It simply means that once your opponent does board wipe you, if your opponent does board wipe you, and also in a lot of situations it does occur, you are going to take a bigger hit. This deck is able to recover from board wipes as long as you have a certain amount of resources in your hand. So yeah, don't overextend. When you do get to this stage, you want to focus on sort of finishing up your backup line. So we're generally already going to have Artemission, Riku, and Yuna out at this stage of the game. And like when you do have ball control, instead of applying more forwards, just build up your backup line. Build up, put in an Aerith, which is effectively free, or put in a Maria. So we really want to get to a point where we have Yuna, Riku, Artemission, Aerith, and Maria as our core 5 backup line. This deck really is quite set in this mentality. These are the 5 backups you want to have in the play. Artemission is really sort of the only backup that doesn't really have a ongoing or relevant impact on the game. He's there to obviously set us up, but also he does kind of have a sort of hidden benefit in that he keeps our Steiner buffed up at a natural 7k while Artemission's on the field because it's FF9. And so if your opponent does try to get a little bit smart by trying to take out your Garnet or take out your Zidane to bump Steiner down, as long as you have Artemission on the field, he's going to be able to stay at that natural 7,000, which is pretty good. Additionally, so we do have 2 archers in the deck, and the reason why we have them is just to have an extra couple of turn 1 backups we can put into play. So yeah, they're 2-cost backups, so if you put them into play early, that's absolutely fine, especially if you just need to get the backups in. Like we said, we really want to get to 3 backups as soon as possible, and in a lot of cases, all we have to do in around the mid game is just use them to break your opponent's backups. Usually the big targets to break are those 3-cost, 3 CP backups that give 1,000 bonus, so stuff like Lebrow, stuff like Lulu, that sort of stuff. Spending your archer to break one of those is pretty good on 2 counts. One is that we're generally not needing the resources nearly as much as our opponent is, because once we do get to a certain amount of backups, we're able to sort of put forwards down and they reactivate a lot of our backups and a lot of our resources. And your opponent is going to be very intensively trying to respond to your aggression. So breaking their backups is more expensive. Plus they spend free to get their buff backup in, and effectively you put Archer in. You put Archer in, which is a cheaper backup. Additionally, it's also relevant against like breaking other sort of more problematic 2-cost, 3-cost backups, such as Red Mage. Both the fire and the lightning version are both annoying to deal with. So yeah, you break your archer for that, and that does give us the opportunity to clear up a backup line to put in like our final backup, whether it's Aerith or Maria. So Archer's in to just sort of give us an extra backup early on. It impedes our opponent during the mid game, and it creates space for us to complete our backup line. So around the late game, our game plan doesn't really change too much, although we will probably be a little bit more aggressive. This deck does have a bit of an issue in that it burns through its deck quite quickly, simply because the FF9 trio does tend to cycle you through a lot of cards, and Pain and the FF10 combo also tend to cycle you through a lot of cards. So this deck is going to burn through a lot of cards quite quickly. We're going to have a much shorter game compared to other decks. So towards the later game, we're going to have to speed things up. Once you get to around the like 15 to like 18 card mark left in deck, this is where you have to sort of all in your opponent a little bit more. You have to break through your opponent's walls and hit through for your opponent's damage. In a lot of cases, your opponent's probably going to be anywhere between 4 to 6 damage at this stage of the game. So all you have to really do is just like leak through damage, and your opponent is going to be very defensively trying to block your forwards to prevent you from leaking damage through. So all you have to do is play aggressively. You can put forwards down much more efficiently than your opponent, and you're not discarding cards to do that. So overall, you're building up an advantage. So so things to keep an eye out at this stage is you've already sort of like, you can already collect quite a bit of information on what your opponent has left. Keep an eye on your opponent's discard. So look at your opponent's discard, look at your opponent's damage, see how many board wipe threats have been depleted out of their deck. So cards, for example, that are relevant are Shantoto. If you see one in the discard pile that they might have discarded early, and then one that you put in damage, it's reasonably safe for you to assume that they don't have a third one, so you can go more aggressive. Against water decks, if you see 2 Clouded Darknesses being burnt, so like, yeah, in the discard pile or in damage zone, you can play a little bit more aggressively. Same with like ice, if they burnt through, say, 3 Zaliras. Usually a lot of ice decks run 3 Zaliras, the Death Seraph, so you can't really sort of commit when you have 2, but as soon as the third one is down, you can play more aggressively. So knowing what your opponent's threats are allow you to play more aggressively and adjust to determine the speed that you want to sort of commit to. And you have to break through your opponent's break through your opponent's walls. So it is okay for you to trade forwards. If your opponent does have a bigger sized forward, it is okay for you to party attack if you are certain your opponent doesn't have a combat trick that will allow them to remove one of your party attackers. Party attacking is fine. It's actually a decent idea for the deck, but you do have to be reasonably certain that your opponent doesn't have any sort of responses that can remove one of your attackers from the field, and then you're attacking with the only remaining one party attacker, and then your opponent blocks that, and so they're effectively 2-for-1ing you. So do keep this in mind, but then again, you want to break through your opponent's walls. You can replace your forwards much easier than your opponent is, and if you're trading them 1-for-1, you're coming out ahead. In regards to specific combos, so this is where I talk a little bit more about some of the intricate and more interesting cards of the deck, and sort of like give you some interesting, cool ways to use them. So Barbarisha is probably one of the most flexible cards in the deck. So when Barbarisha enters play, you choose one of your opponent's forwards and set its power to 1000. Its original power to 1000, so it still retains any buffs that are on it, so do keep that in mind. So you can play this before combat to reduce your opponent's forwards down to 1000 power, which in a lot of cases will just prevent them from using it as a blocker in most cases, unless they need to clear it out. So in a lot of cases, if you play this early on, it means that you're just going to be able to leak attackers through. Its biggest value is when it's used to finish off forwards. So let's say if you do have a situation where you are attacking with, say, a Pain or a Zidane. Let's say you've got a Pain that's 8,000 power because of Maria, and your opponent is blocking with, say, an Emperor. And so that's a good trade for you. Trading a Pain for an Emperor, absolutely fine. But then let's say your opponent uses a buff, some sort of combat trick. Let's say he uses Golem, or let's say he uses something that increases power a little bit higher, like a Golem or a Monk. Okay, all of a sudden your Pain dies and you're unable to finish off the Emperor. Okay, then main phase 2, you play Barbarisha down. Because Emperor has taken 8,000 damage already in the turn, as soon as you set its power to 1,000, even though it does have a Monk buff or a Golem buff or whatever, its power will be still below the amount of damage it receives, so it allows you to finish off forwards. So this is a sort of like a handy backup removal. Also, it's a handy removal in a backup situation if a battle goes bad for you. And in a lot of cases, it's going to be very relevant as well. In addition to this, it also combos well with True Kahulin or Valifor. And so, like, obviously, if you use Valifor, it's dealing 3,000 damage to all your opponent's forwards. And yeah, Barbarisha, because it's set it to 1,000 power, it's able to blow it up. True Kahulin is actually a very interesting little niche thing as well. So because their power is set to 1,000, they do retain any buffs or debuffs on that forward as well. So again, in a situation where you do use True Kahulin on a forward, and for some reason they don't block with it, or it's like not too relevant, if you cast a True Kahulin down onto one of your opponent's forwards and then play Barbarisha on it, because they retain a debuff, their original power will be set to 1,000, and then True Kahulin will debuff it below to 0, right? And so this is actually most relevant against Titan. So Titan means the forward can't be broken via damage or like breaking effects, right? But it still can be broken or like it's sent to the break zone via having 0 power. So let's say if you were, like, again, the Emperor versus Pain situation. You attack with Pain and your opponent blocks Emperor. 8,000 power, they're blocking. Your opponent uses Titan. Emperor cannot be broken this turn. So cool. Your Pain dies. He's taking some damage. Irrelevant, right? If you cast Chukahulan on it, you'll reduce the Emperor's power by, like, say, 2 or 3 or 4,000 power, right? Then you play Barbarisha. When you play Barbarisha down, it sets Emperor's power to 1,000, but it's 1,000 minus whatever the Chukahulan like buffs are. So it goes into effectively like minus 3,000 or minus 2,000 power, and then it's able to be put into break zone because of a game mechanic, not because of damage or not because of a breaking effect. So it's one of the few combos you have to get around Titan. So do keep that in mind against like Earth matchups. Valefor is an awesome card. It's kind of underrated. So yeah, it is a summon that deals 3,000 damage to all your opponent's forwards, and if you control Yuna, which is what this deck is all about, you reactivate all your backups, which is fantastic. So effectively, in most cases, this is a summon that's going to cost you 0 CP. In fact, it's going to gain you CP, so it's like, usually in a lot of cases, it's like -2, -3 CP, if you think about it. It's an EX burst, which is great, so sometimes you do hit it off damage, that reactivates your backups, and now you have options to respond to your opponent. Its main use is to allow your 7 and 8k forwards to trade up against your opponent's, say, 5 or 6 cost forwards that are usually around like 9,000, 10,000, 11,000 power. It allows your forwards to attack in, then you cast Valefor, you're able to deal enough damage to get over your opponent's major forwards, and because your forwards are pretty cheap, most 5 CP forwards and 6 CP forwards are all expensive forwards. So in general, you trading in a Valefor and like a cheap forward is generally still potentially going to be in your favor. And because you have more forwards, you're going to be able to leak through more damage. So Valefor, its main use is to get over big forwards, such as Deleter L, especially Deleter L, because it doesn't target it in any way. Other cards like Emperor Zand are other relevant examples, Lightning, that sort of stuff. Anything that's around, like, that's a natural 9k, this will be able to deal with them. In addition, it's also like really useful to get those like annoying 3k forwards. And the most relevant example would be Heroic Snow from Opus 1. One of the mainstays of the ice deck. It is an annoying 1k, like 1 CP forward that is just going to get through a lot of blockers. You put Valefor down, wipe that kid off the planet. Not to mention, also against Golbez, you can combo 2 of these together. So if you play 2 Valefors against a Golbez deck, if they have a whole bunch of like 2 CP forwards, you're able to wipe all of them off the field in general, because most of them are going to be 6,000 power, 6,000 power forwards. You're going to be able to wipe a lot of them out in case your opponent does ever trigger off the Golbez. In addition, this card can also be combined with Waka and Barbarisha. So basically, Waka and Barbarisha are both effects that can put your opponent's forwards base power to 1,000, allowing it to be cleaned up by Valefor. There have been plenty of times when I haven't necessarily had the water CP to use Waka's status reels ability, but I cast I cast Valefor to deal 3,000 damage to all my opponent's forwards, reactivates my backups, which includes a Yuna, obviously, because of its ability, then tap Yuna to use status reels, put the opponent down to 1,000 power, and they get wiped out from Valefor. So it's like another handy thing you can do with that. One of my favorite combos to use against Earth is when you have 3 backups. When you have 3 backups, your opponent would usually have played one of their 4-2. So when I say 4-2, I mean a Vincent Yuffie or a Yang Ursula, because the 2-drop is free and you get a big 4 cost. That's it. Usually like, say, like 9,000 power or something. So if you have 3 backups and your opponent has like a 4-2, so if you have 3 backups, you put an Aerith, reactivate 3 of your backups, right? And then you tap 2 of your backups, cast Valefor, deals 3,000 damage to all your opponent's forwards. And then because you have Valefor, it reactivates all your backups, including the Aerith that you just put in that turn for free, right? So now you have 4 active backups. You tap all 4 of them, put Barbarisha down, and then wipe out the big forward, which would be Vincent or Yang. And all they're left with is their 2 cost 6,000 power forward. You got a Barbarisha, and you probably got forwards that want to attack in as well. So that is one of my favorite combos. You guys should try it out. It's really, really fun. It allows you to remove forwards. It costs you like no discard. So that's the benefit about this. You get an Aerith in for free. You use the 1 Valefor, and you're able to get Barbarisha in for free without any discards. This combo is extremely efficient. It builds your backup, removes one of their forwards, and it gets your forward at the same time at 3 backups. Think about that. And finally, Bart. He's an extremely cost-effective card in the late game. If you've got 5 backups, Bart is effectively free. So you put him in well, in a lot of cases, he's going to be nearly free in the sense that you tap all 5 backups, and usually we're going to have 3 to 4 win backups. Tap him, put him into play. You're definitely going to have at least 3 win backups available to reactivate. So you reactivate 3 of them. So effectively, yeah, he's a card that's extremely cheap for his power at 9,000 power, right? Not to mention he does also reactivate any win forwards you have, which in general is going to be only Barbaration and Pain, right? One of the issues that Bartz has is that he doesn't reactivate water backups. So what you do is you combo Bartz in with Pain, like the starter deck Pain S. So you play Bartz, reactivate all your win backups, and that's usually going to be at least 3. You tab your 3 win backups, put Pain in, and then you can reactivate any 3 backups you want, which can include some water backups. So instead of locking yourself out so you have no water backups, you put Bartz in, put Pain in afterwards, reactivate, say, 1 water backup and 2 win backups, or 2 water backups, 1 win backup. Pain allows you to reactivate a different set of backups than you would be able to with Bartz, and that's like a cool little combo thing. So you effectively got a 9,000 power forward and a 7,000 power forward with 0 discards on the same turn, and you draw an extra card with Pain, and you get to keep some of your backups open as well. This is why your deck is able to recover so well from board wipes, because you're able to put forwards down without discarding, okay? There have been plenty of times, and actually a couple times during Nationals, your opponent would Shantoto the board, and they aren't able to follow up with another forward, okay? Cool, you've got 5 backups, you put a Bartz down, reactivate some backups, put a Pain down, reactivate some backups, tap 3, put like a Steiner or a Zidane down. Easy done. You've got 3 backups that are mid or large size forwards that you put down on 1 turn without discarding any cards for. And then what is your opponent going to do? They spend a whole bunch of resources on Shantoto or Solera to wipe your board, and you can put a forward board out very quickly with no discards. And that's what makes this deck so resilient, because you're able to trade, but the most relevant part about this deck is that you are not discarding to get your forwards into play. Your opponent is discarding cards to get their forwards into play. If you trade, you are trading all those discards that they use to put their forwards into play off the game. So that's what this deck's all about. Now, moving on to matchups. So I haven't really ranked what I think are easier to more difficult matchups. I think a lot of matchups we have a lot of tools to deal with. So I'm just going to go through them one by one. So first matchup to talk about is Fire. I think this is a mostly pretty even matchup. Definitely people may have a little bit of difficulty dealing with some of the larger forwards such as like Tifa L or Emperor Zan. But again, you just have to be disciplined, trade your forwards in, and then use Valor 4 to finish them off. You have to play more aggressively, which is weird against Fire, simply because being on defense against Fire is really, really bad. It's extremely difficult for you to block Fire because they have stuff like Red Mage, stuff like Imaginary Brawler, Legendary Tifa that makes you unable to block. So you have to hold a lot of forwards active and on defense in order to block 1 or 2 of your opponent's forwards, because they're going to make 2 or 3 of your forwards unable to block. And so all you've got is like your weakest forward blocking their forward. So in that regard, you want to be more, you have to win by aggression. You have to outspeed your opponent, right? You have to fight your opponent, because if you're on defense, you're going to lose 100%. There are very few decks that can deal with Fire defensively, and our deck isn't one of those decks. So we have to speed out and attack aggressively and force our opponent into a situation where they need to block us, and in which case we use combat tricks and we win. So in this matchup, a lot of it is about prioritizing RFR and using Planet Protector. It's extremely valuable against all the big cost damage abilities that your opponent will be using to remove your forwards. Stuff like Bahamut or Emperor Zan, his ability when he blows up, he does destroy one of your forwards. If you have an RFR, it means that you can sort of wipe these big, massive removal abilities, prevent them from happening. So RFR is extremely handy. It can also be used for defense as well. If your opponent is attacking and using, say, like Imaginary Brawler or Legendary Tifa to make one of your guys unblockable, you always have the ability to use RFR, Planet Protector, make them unchoosable, reactivate your forwards, and then block their forwards with one of your forwards, such as like Bartz or something, right? So RFR is extremely relevant in this matchup, and it's probably the reason why I don't feel bad not running Minwoo in this deck. Typically, I love running Minwoo. I think Minwoo makes certain matchups extremely one-sided, and this is definitely one of those matchups that Minwoo would help significantly with. But RFR does have a very pseudo-similar ability in that anytime your opponent is trying to ping you with smaller blocks of damage, Planet Protector can prevent one of those choose abilities from hitting your guy. So in a lot of ways, it can function very similarly in the way that Minwoo can like prevent damage. Also, in regards to combat, your opponent is almost certainly going to be running Belias the Gigas. So it's that summon that gives them plus 1000 power and the first strike. Fighting against fire is always going to be a little bit more difficult simply because they always have that summon available. If they have dealt any damage to any of your forwards, having first strike on their forward is extremely, extremely strong. So in a lot of cases, if you're blocking or if you are going for one of those risky attacks, you want to hold a Leviathan in hand to make sure you can deal with the Belias when it does come down. So your opponent will cast Belias on one of their forwards, you've Leviathan in response, they don't get to the first strike, you don't lose the combat, and they don't draw the card. So having a Leviathan to counter Belias is extremely valuable. Always be wary of that, always keep that in mind. So yeah, and yeah, ultimately this matchup is all about offense. You want to put your opponent on the back foot, because if you don't, your opponent's going to put you on the back foot, they're going to be able to smash through your defense. Also, don't forget that Sylph can be used for both offense and defense, in that it can be used to buff your forwards, but also it can be used for defense as well, to reactivate one of your forwards to block one of your opponent's forwards after they've attacked through. So do keep that in mind. Next is the ice matchup. So I don't think that ice matchup is a per se bad matchup, because there's a lot of tools that wind has to deal with ice. Okay, so that being said, it is a very skill-intensive matchup. Effectively, it comes down to who holds more dull versus reactivation effects. So ice is all about dulling you guys, and wind is all about reactivation. So it's two very opposing forces to use. The benefit to us is that reactivation effects are generally cheaper than dulling effects. So it's going to cost our opponent a little bit more to dull our forwards than it is for us to reactivate them, which is good for us. The big card that we really got to be playing around is Zalira the Death Seraph. So it is a stupidly good summon. At 4 costs, breaks all your opponent's dull forwards that cost 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. So that's pretty much anything that's not 1, 4, 6, and 9, right? And 8 as well. So yeah, this card is stupidly good. It matches up really well in the current metagame against pretty much anything that isn't Earth, right? So yeah, it's able to pretty much take out anything that's relevant in our deck. So you do have to be careful when you attack with your forwards, right? So in a lot of cases, we'll have 2 or 3 forwards on our field at a given time. If you have 3 forwards that are all hittable with Zalira, in a lot of situations, you'll attack with, say, the first 2, your opponent just takes damage, right? As soon as you attack with the 3rd forward, that's when they usually cast Zalira in response to that attack, because now they can sort of prevent that 3rd attack and also destroy your board at the same time. So something to keep in mind is, if you don't have Aerith ready to use as Planet Protector, never attack with the 3rd forward, right? Because your opponent's going to be in a situation where it's like, oh cool, they take the first 2 damage, you don't respond to that, and then they're waiting for the 3rd attack to cast Zalira, but you just don't put the 3rd attack down. So they're like, oh shit, okay, well, yeah, like they don't get the full value out of it, okay? You do that for 1 or 2 turns, your opponent's going to be like, okay, this time, as soon as he attacks with 2 guys, I'm going to cast Zalira. And if they do, that's fine. Then you just like swing with the 3rd one after they cast Zalira. So you want to mess with your opponent, in that you want to make them think you're going to attack with the 3rd guy, and then they're going to hold the Zalira off against it. You don't attack with the 3rd guy, and then at some point they're going to just like say, screw it, okay, we're just going to kill 2 guys, and that's cool. They're not getting full value. It's a whole, don't play into them, so they have to play this card at less value. That being said though, there is an order to which forwards you want to attack with in this situation. So people might think, oh yeah, attack with the 3 cost guys first, leave Barts or something on defense, right? No, don't do that, because if you attack with, say, a Pain, and then attack with Zidane, and then you attack with, and then you hold back a Barts for defense, if your opponent plays a Vayne, that will dull your Barts, right? So in general, you want to attack with your 5 cost first-ish, right? You do have to like think about this, because it's very skill-intensive matchup, so you have to think what you're playing around. But in general, you want to use Barts more as an aggressive attacker rather than defender, because there are specific cards, mainly Vayne, that are just going to shut him off and prevent him from reactivating the entire game. So in general, attack with Barts. Don't use him as a blocker, because he's a shitty blocker in this matchup. So yeah, in regards to Planet Protector, and now see, like this matchup, that the reason why this is a skill match is because how much is your opponent trying to play against you, right? So Planet Protector is really strong in this matchup, but if you have say two or three forwards that are dull, if you play Planet Protector, your opponent can always respond to your Planet Protector by casting Zalira, by breaking all those forwards before you can reactivate them with Planet Protector. Okay, so this matchup in a lot of cases is about you holding off Aerith and your opponent holding off Zalira until the other player is forced to use that card, right? You want to be in a situation where your opponent is forced to use Zalira while you have Planet Protector, and your opponent is trying to force you to use Planet Protector while they have Zalira, okay? So this is what this is all about. So that's why in this matchup, Sylph in particular, try not to use it for combat, and generally you're not going to be using it in combat too much because ice forwards aren't particularly strong. They've only got a couple of forwards that can really sort of reach a 9,000 level, so you really have to have like Laguna Squall combo or like Sid Orstein or something, right? So in general, you're not going to be needing Sylph for combat all too much, but Sylph is going to be very, very helpful to allow you to reactivate certain forwards on defense. And then your opponent is going to try to respond by like getting rid of your forwards. That's when Planet Protector comes down. So hold Planet Protector, even in certain situations where your opponent like uses, say, a Genesis to dull and freeze your last blocker, and you're going to take like 1 or 2 damage. Fight the absolute temptation to use Planet Protector unless your opponent has not enough, unless your opponent doesn't have enough resource to cast Zalira. Hold that temptation, because the worst thing to do is if your opponent uses Genesis, you try to respond to your opponent's attacks by casting Aerith, your opponent then putting the nail in the coffin of Zalira, okay? You try to use Aerith Planet Protector to try to reactivate and take some damage, your opponent casts Zalira, you lose all your guys, and you're going to take this 2 damage now, right? So suck it up, take the 2 damage, unless you're going to die, then you have to do it. Suck it up, take the damage, and then hold it, right? If your opponent gets greedy and think, oh yeah, this guy may not have it, then they cast Zalira in their main phase 2, that's when you Planet Protector, okay? So this is what this matchup is all about. Your Planet Protector versus their Zalira. Like, that's all it's about. So, next is the wind matchup. So, typically you don't face really any sort of mono wind sort of matchup, so it's typically going to be a duo-colored deck, and combined with usually something like water or ice, typically. This matchup is going to be kind of there are problematic cards for you to deal with, so Archer is probably one of the most problematic cards in that it's able to hit out Rikus or hit out Yunas. So it's really important in this matchup for you to keep extra copies of your key backups, so the ones that they do Archer out, you can replace. Typically, they are going to be hitting your Aerith or your Aerith or your Yunas in a lot of cases I've found, so do try to keep extra copies of those. Aerith, you're keeping extra copies in your hand anyway, so that's fine. Don't pitch your last Yuna until either you use all your pains or unless you really have to, right? So do keep that in mind. Something for you to determine as soon as possible is if the wind matchup is playing a mill variant. So if they are running so Riku is almost always going to be in a wind deck, whether it's going to be a water wind deck or whether it's going to be a mill deck. Riku doesn't really sort of clarify whether it's mill deck or not. But if they're playing any thieves or running Sid Highwind or some shit, you can know that they're a mill deck. In this situation, play forwards extremely fast. Just go aggro, okay? Even if they board wipe you, which what sort of board wipes does Win have, right? You have to play extremely aggressive and extremely fast. You got to just discard cards, put forwards out because you're on a clock, okay? And typically you're going to run through your deck fast already. Mill is going to run you through even faster. So you just got to get those forwards down. When you play a Zidane S, make him discard, don't draw cards, and do not play Pain unless you need it to push through for lethal, right? Or you have no choice, right? Generally avoid playing Pain because Pain, they're going to bounce it. They're going to use Legendary Valor, put Pain back into your hand, force you to draw a card again, right? So avoid playing Pain as much as you can, or don't play Yuna. Just don't put Yuna down and put Pain down, reactivate backups, but don't draw a card. Maybe that's something to think about. But yeah, mill, you have to play extremely aggressive and extremely fast. Also something to be aware of is against Windex is reactivation effects like Sylph. So things to consider when to consider your opponent has Sylph is if you are winning, as in you are dealing more damage to your opponent. Typically if you're dealing more damage to your opponent and your opponent is on low life, let's say they've taken 4 or 5 damage and you've only taken say 2 to 3 damage, generally your opponent will have to prioritize blocking or defense, right? So it's really weird when your opponent needs to be prioritizing defense and they decide to attack with one of their big attackers, right? Because typically their big attacker is what they need to have in order to prevent like them taking like free damage from you, right? So when they attack with their big blocker, in a lot of cases you just let it through, right? When they attack with one of their big blockers and you let it through and you take 1 damage, because it doesn't matter whether you go from like 2 damage to 3 damage, because you're still probably going to win the game, right? In those situations, the reason why they're doing that is because they got Sylph. They want to bait you into, oh yeah, I've lost my big blocker, I've lost my 9k, like whatever. So you think, oh yeah, cool, he's lost his big blocker, we'll just attack with all our guys. And he's like, lol, I play Sylph, reactivate my big blocker, block your first guy, he's dead, right? So, no mind in their no good player in their proper mind will attack with their big blocker when they need to be blocking, okay? And that's the hugest red flag for Sylph, okay? In that situation, just like lightly attack with like one of your most expendable units, usually like a Pain or a Zidane or something, and then your opponent may be like, oh yeah, now I'm going to use Sylph to reactivate, okay? In which case, yeah, you just take it on the chin, and then maybe you might tempt your opponent into like trading their big blocker against like another one of your expendable forwards, or you just go to main phase 2, put Barbarishu down and finish off their forward. Done, right? So do keep that in mind. In the win versus win matchup, never discard extra bots. And the reason is because your opponent is almost certainly going to play bots, because bots is such a good card, right? Your opponent's going to play bots and your opponent's going to put Maria down in most cases, so your bots and their bots are going to trade. Do not discard extra bots, because as soon as your bots trade, you're going to have to put another bots down. They'll put another bots down, okay? And yeah, your bots are just going to fight. So whoever runs out of bots first is going to be on defense in a lot of cases. Next is the Earth matchup. The Earth matchup, despite lots of people disliking the Earth matchup, it's actually manageable, okay? And it's manageable in the grindy sense, in that Earth does not have very good resource development, in the sense that Earth has a lot of value. It has a big impact on most of its plays, but it's very resource intensive. Shantotto is a very strong play. Monk is a very strong play. Like Yang Ursa is a very strong play. Vince and Yuffie is a very strong play. But they need to discard a lot of cards to get these plays in. So either they get a whole lot of backups first, in which case you're just wailing on them while they're doing that, or they're discarding a lot of cards, right? So this matchup is all about attrition. Very specifically about attrition, right? So it's all about trading guys, okay? If you're trading your like 7-8Ks into your opponent's big guys, you're winning, because your opponents put a lot more resource into their guys than you're putting into your guys. Trade, and your opponent will eventually get to the point where they're just letting you leak through damage, right? And at some point, they're just going to have to Shantotto you. They're definitely going to Shantotto you. In a lot of cases, they're going to Shantotto you before their 5th turn. Almost certainly, they're going to Shantotto you for your 5th turn. All right. As soon as that happens, you just apply more forwards. Like I said earlier, hold bots, hold Pain. As soon as they Shantotto you, go bang, 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 3 guys down. Deal with that. And then your opponent's in a top decking situation where they have like maybe 1 or 2 cards in hands. They draw 1 or 2 cards. They discard a card, put down like a Vincent down, or put down a Yang, and then you just run over the guys, right? So this matchup is all about using cards like Valor 4S to trade your 3 CPs into your opponent's 4 CPs. And if you're able to do that enough times, your opponent is just going to run out of resources. You're going to find your opponent's got like 2 cards in hand, and you've got like a hand of like 4 or 6 cards in hand, and you've got way more backups than your opponents. You just keep running forward. Even times when your opponent is going to like use, say, monks to win a combat, that's absolutely fine. I found in a lot of situations, if your opponent's using monks on defense, then you're winning on resources, because monk is an extremely expensive backup to use, especially the one that costs 2 earth. Because if your opponent has like no backups active, then they're going to break their monk and discard an earth card in order to win a combat, right? So that's absolutely fine. Like, because you're losing a pretty whatever forward, right? And yeah, your opponent's breaking a backup, so that's kind of like 2 CP within itself. They're losing the monk itself, and they're losing a card from themselves. They're paying a huge amount to not lose 1 combat, right? And that means their forward only probably has like 2 to like 3,000 like power still remaining on them. You just have the other forwards. So your opponent's like, what? They want to trade their big forward against like another one of your like sort of mediocre forwards, and then you like leak through 1 or 2 more damage, right? So monks are extremely cost prohibitive to use, and against our deck, it's actually what probably loses them the game in a lot of cases, I feel. Yeah, that's what I significantly noticed. Every time my opponent like breaks a monk, I never feel behind. Even though I've lost a forward, I feel that my opponent's paid more to win that combat than me losing like a certain forward. So do keep that in mind. Against so something also to note is in your like first 1 or 2 games against Earth, determine how many Hecaton Cares are they using in their deck. Whether they're someone that plays as a 1-off or a 2-off, or whether they just go 3-off, right? In those situations, hold extra Marias in hand to replace the ones they break with Hecaton Care, because Marias are very handy to get you guys that like 1k further, and Hecaton Cares that is pretty much like that's pretty much the only Hecaton Care target besides from Aerith. But like if they do Hecaton Care Aerith, it's kind of whatever, you know, because they're not, in a lot of cases, they're not really targeting your guys. Plus, you're usually holding like an Aerith in hand, so you can just put another one down for free, and if like spend a whole lot of resources to try to get rid of Aerith. So in a lot of cases, they'll be targeting out Maria. Avoid discarding your extra Marias early if you can, and yeah, your opponent's got to spend a lot of resources to get Marias down. You just put them back into play, pretty much like that. Next is the Lightning matchup. So Lightning matchup is probably one of the easier matchups, and again, this is more of an attrition type matchup because Lightning has a lot of removal. But a lot of your guys like kind of dodge different types of removal, right? So Garnet is immune to targeting summons. So like Odin can't hit Garnet, right? So yeah, Odin can't hit Garnet. Alcid can be dealt with via Aerith, but Aerith can't protect against Cyclops. So your opponent, it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors type deal of whether your opponent's got like Odin, Alcid, or Cyclops, right? And then you've got different things to sort of deal with all those different effects, right? So yeah, Garnet is usually going to be a target of Alcid in a lot of cases. Dorgans are going to be Odin in a lot of cases. Your Barts get Cyclops, all these little sort of things, and sort of like Cyclops gets around Aerith and so on. So the way to play this matchup is after your opponent uses a specific type of removal, you follow up by playing your threat that is weak to that piece of removal, right? So if your opponent has burnt 1 or 2 Odins, that's when you get Waka S down, right? If your opponent's like burnt their Alcid, that's when you get Garnet down, because Alcid is usually going to be target Garnet. As soon as they burn the Alcid, you can get Garnet down, right? So these are all things that you sort of like gotta like mentally keep in mind. What your opponent's burnt, that's what you sort of follow up against, right? And again, yeah, even though that they've got pretty efficient ways of removing your forwards, in a lot of cases, they don't really have a lot of forwards that are very good at fighting. Gilgamesh is pretty much one of their few forwards in a lot of Lightning decks that do fight well. A lot of them are running Alcids, and Alcid and all its sort of like following forwards aren't very strong. So in between Ununited and in between Rigdia, they're not very strong. So a lot of your forwards are just going to run over the guys. And even if your opponent wants to like burn a Cyclops to try to allow their Alcid to like outfight one of your Zidane or Pains, that's absolutely fine. So again, it's just that like monk thing again. So in a lot of cases, I find that like your opponent's going to have like 1 backup active. Your opponent like has 1 backup active, discards a card, casts Cyclops to cause their Alcid or their Ununite to outfight one of your Pains or Zidanes or something, right? That's kind of like whatever still. It's like your opponent spent like 1 resource and 2 cards to get rid of one of you guys that were like nearly effectively free, right? So yeah, that's absolutely cool. So you just play another 1 down. So yeah. So force your opponent to try to use removal on your like expendable guys, and just play more expendable guys and just win. So yeah, that's kind of why this matchup's a little bit easier. Do note you want to keep removal against Gilgamesh S because you can't bounce him, so you don't have an easy out in the form of Leviathan to get rid of him. In a lot of cases, you're going to want to fight him and deal with him with a true lane. So a lot of times players are going to use Gilgamesh's ability to pay Lightning from their backup in order to give him plus 1,000 power, right? And so the goal is you want to fight the Gilgamesh and you want his Chukulan to reduce his power and win the fight. That's pretty much the only way you're going to do it, right? What you have to do when you are in this situation is attack with something that can't be Odin, right? So you have to attack with something like Garnet, or you attack with a Steiner, or you attack with a Bartz, right? And then as soon as they block with the Gilgamesh, that's when you cast Chukulan, right? Because your opponent can't then respond with, oh yeah, I'm going to cast Odin 4 on your attacker, and Gilgamesh is safe, right? So had you attack with like a Pain or Zidane, and then they block with Gilgamesh, and then use Chuchulain to give their Gilgamesh, like say -3 or -4, right? Your opponent responds, discard 2 cards, Odin to Pain or Odin to Zidane, which still isn't even terrible for us, to be honest, right? But then like their Gilgamesh doesn't die, and yeah, we don't. And we have to like skip through it again, right? So generally go attack with something that's immune to Odin, then Chuchulain it. And then As soon as that happens, your opponent can't Odin the Garnet, your Garnet wins combat, and then you like send your like Pains and the Zidane through, and your opponent, if they don't want to take the damage, they're forced to Odin your guys there. So that is kind of something to keep in mind. Finally, last matchup is water matchup. So typically, if there's a deck that's running water, it's typically going to be a mono water deck or a water wind hybrid deck. So like a YRP deck, very similar to ours. So in this situation, Garnet is probably the most relevant forward in the sense that Garnet is immune to a lot of water's best summons, such as Leviathan, such as Chuchulain, and so on, right? But her only like effective weakness is Famfrit. So that's the only summon that can effectively hit her from water. As long as you've got someone like a Pain or Zidane like to buddy up with her, Famfrit's going to keep you safe all the time, right? So absolutely not an issue whatsoever, as long as you have another buddy that you can sacrifice to Famfrit, which this deck can do pretty easily, so it's not a big deal. In a situation where you are going to cast something like Sylph, cast it on Garnet, right? Because if you cast it on one of your other forwards, your opponent may just use Leviathan to bounce it, and now because Sylph gives plus 1,000 power to all your forwards, if they bounce whatever you Sylphed, not only do you not get the reactivation ability, but your entire board doesn't get that plus 1,000 buff because the target's lost, right? So if you cast Sylph, cast it on Garnet because that's one of the few forwards that your opponent is unable to bounce, and so you guarantee the plus 1,000 buff to all your guys, despite having to reactivate Garnet. But the fact that Garnet gets like the Sylph buff and her plus 1,000 buff means that she's going to be a pretty decent blocker anyways. So so make sure you cast your Sylphs on Garnet. Against water, you're going to find situations where you have to deal with Cagnazzo, especially mono, like pretty much only the mono water variant, right? You're going to have to use ways to get rid of it that aren't damage. So in a lot of cases, it's going to be something like you have to use Waka, attack with Waka, buff Waka, and he's going to get over Cagnazzo, right? Additionally, like status reels or Barbaricious effect to make Cagnazzo's power 1,000 is also very relevant as well. The annoying thing against water is that a lot of them use Minwu, so you can't attack with a guy, Cagnazzo blocks it, and it takes 2,000 damage, and use Barbaricious to finish it off. In a lot of cases, you have to use Barbaricious first, force a Cagnazzo to chump block one of the blockers. That's something to keep in mind. Or you have to use party attacks to deal with it. So like 2 waters or 2 winds, party attack, and only that's really enough to get over Cagnazzo. Although you can, like, there's one kind of like other forward that allows you to do that, and that's Bards with Maria buff. You can get over Cagnazzo with Waka buff. So yeah, do keep that in mind. He's probably one of the more annoying forwards to face in the deck. A lot of our forwards are pretty easy to deal with. The most psychological part of this matchup is the Garnet versus Garnet mirror match. And that you have a Garnet, your opponent's got a Garnet. You both got summons, but neither can hit the other Garnet, right? So that's always a fun one. You really at that point you have to play smart in terms of you have to figure out what's the best way to bait your opponent's Garnet into blocking or attacking, or how do you buff your Garnet. You basically have to get the Garnets to run into each other, and you gotta like predict how many summons you can use to buff your Garnet versus your opponent's Garnet. So do keep that in mind. You have to determine what your opponent's summon line is in water, whether they're a deck that plays Famfrit, whether they play Fairies, whether they play Chukahulans. Figure out that number, figure out what sort of summons they use, and play accordingly. Almost every water deck is going to be run free Leviathan, so do keep that in mind. But yeah, determine if your opponent is someone that likes to play Famfrit or not, whether they play Sildra. You can, like, generally they'll be discarding certain cards in the early game, and you can use that to determine sort of like what summons they got left. Depending on the deck, most decks, and I think this is like kind of something that people don't realize actually, is that most decks run between like 8 to 11 summons. So however many summons are in their damage zone and in their break zone, you subtract it from like 10, and that gives you how many summons they got left, right? So you just determine how many summons your opponents have burned, and that gives you a feel for how many summons they got left. Then you sort of like figure out, oh yeah, they still kind of got half a deck and like some cards in hand, so you can kind of feel that like, oh yeah, they may have like 1 or 2 summons left, right? So keep in mind like summons as a limited resource that your opponent has, and play like accordingly for that against water. So next is metagame changes. So against more like sort of weenie aggro decks, I would probably switch out 1 Leviathan and 1 Chuchulain for another Sylph and Valor. So the Leviathan for Sylph, that's probably going to be like more for like ice-based weenie aggro, just because Leviathan against like really aggro decks doesn't do quite so much. But Sylph in a lot of cases is going to be very relevant because a lot of weenie aggro decks are going to be using double tap effects. So Sylph to give you guys buffs and to reactivate forwards is super handy, especially against stuff like Snow, especially if you're using like the 2-cost backup Sarah to make Snow unchoosable. Yeah, stuff like Stealth can reactivate you guys to block, as opposed to like you trying to use abilities to stop it. True Lane is kind of expensive as well, so we just like bump that number from free down to 2, and then we like replace it with a Valor 4S, because yeah, being able to spread free K to your opponent's like annoying free Ks is really handy. Also, if you have 2 of them in hand, you can like wipe 6Ks. So that's a pretty good ball wipe, and effectively doesn't cost you anything while you have Yuna out. So yeah, that's for weenie aggro type decks. For Ice, I would switch out True Lane for a Sylph. So basically, True Lane is like, yeah, an aggressive type summon. When you're attacking, you cast it to get through opponent's blockers, but Ice does have a lot of big blockers. So Sylph does still give you power buffs as well, so that's handy. But its main use is that it allows you to reactivate. So it's basically more reactivations against your opponent's dull effects, right? So yeah. Against fire or lightning, usually the sort of ping variants, I would switch out your Aeriths. So Aeriths like is a great card, but if your metagame is like very intensive fire, very intensive lightning, then I would switch 3 of the Aeriths out and put 2 Min Moves and 1 Scholar in. Scholar is what like the 2-cost Scholar is kind of like a card that I really wanted to put in this deck, but I couldn't find a space, and it was like I had to decide between Archers or Scholars, and like Scholars is cool when you combo with a Bart or a Pain, but it doesn't help you sort of win the game. So that's why I sort of went Archers, because it's sort of setting your opponent back. Minwu, obviously, because like Fire and Lightning have a lot of ping effects. If you put Minwu down, that sort of takes a lot of their power off the table. So that's why. And against Earth, I would take away 2 Archers and put in 2 Scholars. And the reason for this is because, yeah, Earth has a lot of very strong abilities, and they're going to be just like crushing the shit out of like your Forge, right? Whether it's going to be stuff like Railbound, or whether it's going to be stuff like Death Penalty, or whether it's going to be stuff like Shantoto. If you are able to return some of those forwards back to your hand, it means that you're keeping these forwards, which you can play for virtually no resources again. And at the same time, your opponent's spending a whole lot of resources, because Railbound's quite an expensive backup when you think about it, right? It's cost 4, so your opponent's generally going to be discarding a card. If you're able to like Scholar up a Pain or something, or Scholar up a Bart's, yeah, you don't lose a forward, you get it down for effectively free again, and your opponent spent a whole lot of resources trying to deal with it, especially like stuff like Shantoto as well. Your opponent is going to be way more wary of that Shantotos if you're just sitting on a Scholar. Just an active Scholar, your opponent's going to be like, oh yeah, do I kind of want a Shantoto? It's like, if I don't Shantoto, he's got 3 guys to my like 1 guy. But if I do Shantoto, he's just going to Scholar, and he's going to bring one of his guys back to his hand. And so like I'm only Shantotoing 2 of his guys versus 1 of my guys, you know? Not to mention, Archer isn't particularly good against Earth, because Earth doesn't have a lot of super good like 2 and 3 cost backups. They typically run like Monks and Enacrow. So Enacrow is pretty much the only thing you're going to be hitting anyways. And I feel a lot of Earth decks don't prioritize putting Enacrow down very early. A lot of times they're just putting backups down and then playing 4-2s. 4-2s, 4-2s, 4-2s. That's what they're doing most of the time. So they're not prioritizing like Enacrow nearly as often. And hitting, there's nothing else to hit really, right? It's like there's nothing else to hit. Like it's gonna be Shantoto or like Railbounds. Yeah, Monks are pretty much the only things to hit, but like Monks are going to lose some games. So I don't even want to get rid of Monks. I want my opponent to just use Monks, discard cards from their hands, use their Monks, win a combat, but like cost themselves way more resources. So yeah, that's what I do for Earth matchup. And final tips. This deck chews through itself extremely quickly. So I know that I've been saying this about the last couple of decks I've talked about, but this is by far the fastest self-burning deck that I've built so far. This deck has the shortest time in which you need to complete games. Obviously, it's not so bad that you just like instant lose all the time if you like not attack for turn, but you do want to be attacking. You do want to be playing aggressively, and you do want to sort of be pushing your opponent out. So yeah, so definitely do play aggressively. Take the party attacks if you need to. If your opponent's low on resources and you don't think they got a response, party attack your 2 like 7Ks into one of their like 9Ks or 10Ks. Trade 1 for 1. That's fine. You get over their wall. Very unlikely they're going to put another big wall down nearly as easily, and you can just put that forward super easily as well. So take the trades when you need to push the game through. And finally, yeah, just like unless you're sure your opponent's got a trap, attack as often as you can. I say this a lot, but just attack in the sense that because your deck has so many combat pumps, the first couple of times your opponent's gonna block, right? If your opponent's got an 8,000 power like blocker and you got 7,000 power like forwards attacking, you attack with one of your guys. Maybe your opponent's got like a Gilgamesh, or maybe your opponent's got like an Emperor or something. I keep going back to Emperor, right? And you've got like a Zidane or a Pain, and you just attack. First time they might block it, okay? And then you cast True Lane, or you cast Sylph, or you cast something, and you win the fight, or you trade the fight, right? And your opponent's gonna realize, oh yeah, he's attacking when he's got answers. Or if like you attack, they block, your guy dies, you play Barbarusha, the guy dies anyways, right? So your opponent's gonna be really like wary. After the first 1 or 2 times, your opponent's just gonna stop blocking you, okay? And as soon as your opponent stops blocking, you just win the game. In the sense that, like, hey, in your first game, you might have to spend resources to get over the AKs. Like, you have to buff your 7k to get over the AKs. They block, they lose a fight, and they're gonna like lose a lot of resources, right? Because they've lost their AK, and you've still got your forward, right? You do that a couple of times, your opponent's going to start catching on, okay? So as soon as you're attacking with a smaller guy against a bigger guy, they're always going to think, oh yeah, he's got a buff, right? So if you go into game 2 and game 3, even if you don't have the buff, and this is crazy, right? Even if you don't have the buff, you attack with a smaller guy, your opponent may not even block you, actually. So that's actually a crazy thing. So yeah, in some of my matches at the national championships, I had like Pain and Zidane, and my opponent had I think a Gilgamesh or something, a Gilgamesh, but he had 3 tapped backups. I attack with the Pain. He doesn't block. I got a 7k to his 8k, right? But he's worried that I have True Lane, so like I'm going to minus 3k on this guy and he's going to lose, right? So yeah, so he was super afraid. I just attack with Pain, doesn't block. Attack with Zidane, doesn't block. I've got 2 7ks and he's got an 8k, right? And he doesn't want to block. And that's what you do. If you have so many combat responses, your opponent doesn't want to block you. And so it's like your opponent's going to leak through early damage because they think to themselves, oh yeah, you know, going from like 1 damage to 3 damage, not too bad, right? Better than losing it forward. But if you don't even have it, you can just bluff it. In a lot of cases, you just attack with guys. Okay, just attack with guys. In a lot of cases, your opponent is just going to question themselves a lot more. So just attack. Attack. Make your opponent guess whether it's a good time to block or not. See, that's the thing. If you don't attack, you're guessing whether it's a good time to attack or not, right? So you lose because maybe it was a good time to attack and you didn't attack. But if you attack, you force your opponent to play the guessing game of, is it a good time to block? And if your opponent doesn't block, even when it is a good time to block, they lose by default, right? So you push the guessing game defaultness onto your opponent and you just win. So that's my big, massive tip. Attack. You have plenty of responses to attacks. In all cases, if you don't, in the case that you don't, your opponent may just let you through anyways. Especially in the early game. So yeah. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Yet another long video. Yeah, feel free to post questions or comments or feedbacks in the comment section below. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. I've also been checking out the Snapchats as well. So I think I'll put the Snapchat linky down below. So if you guys use Snapchat, apparently I'm learning the social media thing. So check that out. This weekend is PAX for me, so I'll be like checking a whole bunch of shit up on there. Yeah, and if you like my content, I would really appreciate it if you support my channel by subscribing. That would be really, really good. It just helps us like sort of get our viewability up a little bit higher. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. Grand J out.